welcome into another edition of the Install with Greg Cosell of NFL Films. That's Greg. I'm Buck. It's lovely to have you guys in for another episode. If you're new to the show, hello. Happy to have you guys in for today's podcast. We're less than 2 weeks away from training camp, Greg, and I know that you are spending your off season making the rounds, right? You're getting ready to head down to Dallas for a really, really unique event that I know you took part in and really very much enjoyed last year.
Yeah, it was last year was my first year. I think it's the 7th year of this particular event. It's the O-Line's Mastermind Summit. Duke Manyweather kind of runs it. Jeff Schwartz is a big part of it. Lane Johnson is a major part of it. But it's a really cool event for me. O-line play obviously is kind of its own animal. I mean, as Duke Manyweather started last year, my guess is he'll say the same thing again this year. He started last year by saying when young kids are, 7 and 8 and starting to play football, no one says, "Hey, Dad, I want to put my hand in the ground and be an offensive lineman." So it's a unique mindset that a lot of these players have, and to learn how they approach it, to learn how they're taught, to learn how they game plan every week, and what's involved in being an O-lineman. And he brings in a lot of former O-linemen, some are Hall of Famers like Steve Hutchinson, who I believe is a Nashville resident. Andrew Whitworth was there last year. I mean, there's a lot of guys who come in addition to present players. College players now are involved. So it's a great event, not only for the formality of it, the actual things that Duke, as I said, the formal things, but just the side conversations are great. Last year, I think I took 8 or 9 pages of notes. I expect to do the same this year.
Would you say that offensive line, for as much as it's discussed, is probably the position group that we are able to analyze at least, the average fan, the average NFL consumer, able to analyze the least efficiently for as little as we know about hand fighting techniques and, the respective steps that they have to take to make sure they're getting their pass sets and all the different things that go into offensive line play?
I would say that's fair, Buck, because I can tell you one thing. I've been watching coaching tape since 1992. Okay, so that's 32 years. And to this day, let's say when I study offensive linemen who are coming out in the college draft, the NFL draft, I still at times, particularly with interior offensive linemen, guards and centers, still feel like I'm kind of spitting in the wind. Now, I've had people who know way more than I do tell me that I know more than I think I know, but still, I never feel as comfortable just because there's so many techniques, as you just threw out, that, I was never taught. I just don't feel comfortable. And I think that that's probably true with most people. It's really a detailed, nuanced position. It's not just a bunch of big guys trying to, knock other big guys in the dirt. I mean, it's really nuanced and detailed. Fortunately, I've been to a lot of training camps in my career. And if you get close to offensive line coaches while they're teaching, I mean, you've been to camps, you know what I'm talking about. I mean, 3 inches when it comes to a step is a big deal to an offensive line coach. Hand placement, you could be off by 2 inches, and that's a big deal. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that's taught on a daily basis.
I mean, my God, just trying to take in as much information from Bill Callahan's offensive line individual drills as humanly possible right now, Greg, and not even to throw shade on previous Titans offensive line coaches that have been through here, but just the level of specificity, the level of detail that's required for them to be able to execute their assignment as best as humanly possible, because you can't get it perfect, right? Things are happening so fast all over the place, especially the interior offensive line, where we talk about the importance of the interior offensive line, especially where you're getting so much pressure from guys like Chris Jones, Jeff Simmons, Quinnen Williams, and what a premium has become as far as having that on your football team. These guys are trying to do so much in such a little amount of time, and really on the inside, so little space between where the action actually happens.
And there's a lot that goes on here. Don't forget, we're not even talking about all the multiple defensive fronts that they face, because you could have a play call. Let's say it's a run play, a zone run play, and there's multiple different kinds of zones, as I'm sure many people listening know. But then all that is dependent on how the defensive front lines up, how you go about specifically blocking it. And so when you go beyond just the individual play of a particular offensive lineman, then you get into what the defense looks like and the changes that defenses make. Don't forget, defensive players at the snap of a ball might be static, but when the ball's snapped, there's movement. Everything changes. And as a defensive lineman, you've got to respond to, excuse me, as an offensive lineman, you've got to respond to that. All the blitz concepts that we now see in the NFL. This goes way beyond just the individual teaching of technique and fundamentals. So there's so much that's involved in offensive line play. And the other part of this is 5 guys have to work together. It's not just one guy. 5 guys. That came out so much last year, my first year at this event, the O-Line Mastermind Summit, is the cohesion that's involved and how that's why it's so important for that group to work together and develop continuity.
Absolutely. Well, I look forward to your page-by-page reading of your
we won't do
9-page
that.
offensive line code.
Yeah. It won't be an audio book. Don't worry about it.
You know what? Some sickos out there, Greg, would probably buy that audio book. Absolutely so. God knows a couple of Titans offensive linemen could have used it in years past. But we're here to continue our team-by-team previews, and we'll wrap up the AFC East today with a team that has undergone a tremendous amount of change, but still has some very, very similar themes in the New England Patriots. Of course, anytime you lose a person like Bill Belichick in your building, you're talking about a pretty seismic shift. But if you're trying to make that a little less cage rattling, keeping somebody like Drake Maye, who has institutional knowledge, who knows how things are run there, who knows how things have been run there, and who, of course, was a good player for that franchise, to steady things at the helm is going to be a fascinating thing. Of course, the former off-ball linebacker Drake Maye, former Tennessee Vol, as a matter of fact.
Yes.
Tennessee fans will remember him fondly. But new quarterback, new head coach, a lot of new with the New England Patriots, and long overdue, it seems, at this point, because, for whatever reason, we talk about things not panning out for players or coaches, and Mac Jones now on the Jacksonville Jaguars roster. This is a pretty interesting case study for a team in transition in a really, really interesting division.
And it's interesting that we started by talking about the O-Line Mastermind Summit and O-Line play, because one could argue that could be the most critical piece to this team, because they're going to start Jacoby Brissett. They drafted Drake Maye, but whoever ends up playing, it'll be Brissett to start. They're going to need really good O-line play, because this team's going to have to be able to run the ball enough to sustain offense, control clock, ideally control the pace and tempo of games as best as possible. So really much of how they play, and if they're to have some success, and I know many think that they'll be a bad team. We obviously have no idea about that in July right now. But it's really starts, in my view, with their offensive line. They're going to need to be able to do what I just suggested, because even at the receiver position, there's a lot of new faces. And they did re-sign Ramondre Stevenson. They gave him a decent amount of money. He is the kind of back that can be a sustainer, and he even does have some big play element to him. And they did sign Antonio Gibson from the Commanders. So, that's where it really starts offensively for them. I think they would really like to be at least competitive enough that they don't feel like they have to rush Drake Maye into playing. Obviously, he was their number 1 pick, the 3rd pick in the draft. But they signed Brissett for a reason, and you can line up and play with Jacoby Brissett, no question.
No, absolutely. And that's what teams have done in years past, whether it's the Browns most recently, or I know he had a good stretch of playing time with the Indianapolis Colts in the AFC South. And Jacoby Brissett, when you talk about him as a player, I guess what kind of stands out when you say that you can line up and play with Jacoby Brissett? What differentiates him from maybe your league average NFL backup replacement level starter?
Yeah, I always thought that Brissett, and I remember watching him at North Carolina State, and I kind of liked him coming out. And he was originally, I think, a 3rd round pick. He's been in the league, close to a decade now, I would think.
Yeah.
But
in fact, 2016, I want to say he was drafted.
Okay, yeah, that sounds about right. And I think he was a 3rd round pick. So, I mean, it's not like he was a throwaway pick. You draft a quarterback in the 3rd round, and you do believe maybe at some point he can become a starting quarterback in this league. But the thing that always struck me about Brissett first of all, he's very big. He throws the ball well, but I always thought one reason that he never truly was able to get over that hump, Buck, and become, a full-time starter where you felt like, hey, he's my guy, is he's a very, very cautious player, which is good in the sense that he's not likely to turn it over, but he's always left a lot of throws on the field. He just doesn't turn throws loose that you need to turn loose at the NFL level. And as I said, if you have a really good team, if you can run the football really well, if you can control the game, if your defense is really good, then you can line up and play with him, and he's not likely to be the reason you lose games because he's not going to make those kinds of throws. He's very risk averse. But at some point in this league, you have to turn it loose. And he's just always been a little leery of doing that. And like I said, depending on the team, that can be viewed as good. Or overall, though, I would say that it ends up being more of a negative than a positive. But he's certainly not the kind of quarterback that's going to go out there and you feel like, oh, my God, he's going to go 12 for 28 with 4 picks. He's not that guy.
Right. To your point about, what a respective team might be looking for, and he's obviously been a backup for the bulk of his career. This will be his opportunity to be a starter for however long that lasts, because of course they did spend the first round pick, 3rd overall, on Drake Maye, who we talked briefly about in the pre-draft process, Greg, but didn't spend a ton of time on for local purposes. Titans weren't in the quarterback market this past offseason. And they did also add another VFL. Joe Milton is wandering around there launching bombs somewhere in New England. And I know he's been the subject of some discussion up there in Boston sports talk radio, certainly. But with Drake Maye specifically, there, to your point, there's no urgency for him to start right away with Brissett there. None of these guys are ready, plug and play type of players when they come from college to the NFL, of course. But for Drake Maye, what do you like about the traits that he comes in with, and how he might be able to expand on that repertoire at the NFL level?
Yeah, I thought that Drake Maye was the toolsiest quarterback in this draft. I was able to meet him for 5 minutes at the combine. I was on the field and I introduced myself, and he is a big dude. And that's a trait, by the way. People have to understand when you're 6'4", 225, that's a trait. More so than someone who's 6'1", 210. So I thought, and I know this, look, for people who may be watching the Giants Hard Knocks, I think they know that the Giants really wanted Drake Maye. I know another team that really felt that Drake Maye was the #1 quarterback prospect in this draft and wanted him. They did not get him because they were not able to draft at that spot in the draft. But you're talking about a guy with size, arm strength, good ball placement that needs to get better, but he's not scattershot all over the place. Plus athleticism, moves well. I thought for the most part he played with a sense of poise and composure. I thought he did show the ability to work through progressions. I never felt like he was hurried or frenetic. I thought that there was a lot to like about him. Now, having said that, there are some flaws in his game. And I thought the biggest were that he was at times inconsistent with his ball placement. As I said, he missed a few too many routine throws. Those are the ones you can't miss in the NFL. And I thought that he was a guy, and this is something that can be fixed, but you never know. He drifted in the pocket to his left. And by drifting, I mean he would drop back, and when there was no pressure on him whatsoever, he would just slightly move to his left. And if you talk to offensive linemen, as I'm sure you have, Buck, they hate that because that changes the way the protection works. And offensive linemen, they protect to the play call. And when the quarterback moves for no reason, that's a problem. And that can be corrected, but it doesn't automatically mean it will be corrected. You know that anything that can be corrected, sometimes it is corrected, sometimes it's not.
This is a team, as you mentioned, that's invested in their running game, their offensive line as well. They bring back Owenu, the swing tackle, who figures to be their right tackle. They pay Ramondre Stevenson, who has been a solid to at times above average running back in their system. And they have Alex Van Pelt, the former Browns offensive coordinator, has been in the league a long, long time at this point. He is now the OC for Gerard Mayo's football team. Fair to assume that they're going to try and take pressure off whomever is playing quarterback at any given point. with their rushing attack. What kind of stands out about Alex Van Pelt as a coach in the scheme?
Yeah, it's funny. I was thinking about that, and I don't necessarily remember him in great detail when he was an offensive coordinator elsewhere,
Mm.
but I think it's evident with the personnel that they have. And given that you have a defensive head coach, and we'll get to their defense in a second, because that's a critical piece here. I would say offensive line and defense are their two most critical pieces. I know that sounds strange in the era of quarterback play, but we know they don't have a top 10 quarterback in the league on their roster. So therefore, when you look, if you're the coach, if you're Gerard Mayo, if you're Alex Van Pelt, if you're whoever on that coaching staff, what do you have to say to yourself? You have to say, how can we win games? How can we stay in games and be competitive and ideally win games in the fourth quarter? Because they know that this is not a team that they're going to jump out 24-3 at halftime. That's not the way this team is. So what is the way that they can stay in games? It's run the ball and play defense. So that's what Alex Van Pelt has to do as an offensive coordinator. They have to be creative in the run game. And they have to count on their O-line to be a major factor. So this leads us to their defense. And jump in here, but I mean, we can talk about specific players, scheme, but their defense is absolutely critical to any success that they hope to have.
And they have good players on their
Yeah.
defense. Matthew Judon missed a ton of time last year, but figures to come back healthy,
Yep.
even if he is at an advanced age at this point. They pay Kyle Duggar, the safety, this past offseason. And Bill Belichick being in New England, nobody ever said Bill Belichick forgot how to be a good defensive coach. It was just the management of the situation and, other outlier circumstances regarding his position with the organization that ultimately saw them move on this past offseason. DeMarcus Covington is the defensive coordinator there. Fair to assume, though, that there will be a lot of similarities from Bill Belichick to Gerard Mayo in the way that this defense is orchestrated.
Yeah, and by the way, their defense was good last year. This is a defense that has good personnel. You mentioned Judon, who's a really good edge player, a really good pass rusher. You mentioned Duggar, who is as good a sort of box overhang safety as there is in the league. Because safeties can be grouped into multiple kinds of categories. He's kind of a box safety, but he's really good at it. And one guy they did re-sign that went totally under the radar. It happened about 2-3 weeks ago, and that's Jelani Tavai. And he is a really good player that a lot of people may not be aware of. And the way he was used previously and was very effective, so I assume he'd be used and deployed in a similar fashion. He was almost a multi-dimensional type linebacker. He lined up as a stack player. He lined up on the ball. He's got really good size. He's athletic. He was used in their blitz packages. As I said, an overlooked signing of a player that's not well known nationally, Buck, but a really good football player.
It probably won't be a Super Bowl campaign this year for the New England Patriots, but obviously, teams are in their respective life cycles as these things go on, and there are definitely some things for them to build upon. That division, as we've talked about from top to bottom, and now as we finish the AFC East, Greg, Buffalo still seems like they are the team to beat in the division, though Miami, finishing very, very close to them last year. I know both teams have changed over a fair amount of parts, but I'm as interested in the AFC East this year as I think I am in any division in football.
Yeah, and you didn't mention the Jets, who obviously, assuming a healthy Aaron Rodgers playing at a normal level for him, the Jets become a fascinating team. So look, you look at the Patriots right now and with their offense in particular, and you think, hey, they're the fourth place team. And that's likely to be the case. But again, like you said, they're probably, they know they're not a Super Bowl team this year. So now you're a rookie head coach. You're trying to build a foundation with building blocks. They obviously drafted Drake Maye with the idea that he can be down the road in their mind. That's why they drafted him where they did, a top 5 or 6 quarterback in the league. We don't know the answer to that right now. But if he were to move in that direction, you know how quickly things could change. I mean, look how quickly things changed with the Cincinnati Bengals with Joe Burrow. Things change dramatically when your quarterback all of a sudden becomes a top flight player. And we don't know the answer about May. As I said, I thought he was the toolsiest quarterback in the draft. Does that mean he'll be a great player, in 6 months? Can't answer that. But a lot of teams wanted Drake Maye, and a lot of teams had him as the number 1 quarterback on their board. I can tell you that.
I'm looking forward to talking about the Bengals whenever it is that we get around to their preview, because Burrow made some comments the other day to team media about being able to be more scheme versatile this year based on their personnel, which of course piqued my interest because the Titans took a bunch of personnel from the
Yeah, I
Cincinnati
mean, and
Bengals.
you're right, because now look, they played one of the highest percentages of 11 personnel in the league a year ago. And obviously, when Burrow's healthy, he can do anything. He can play with any personnel package. But, I think a lot of offensive coaches would like to be, more versatile in terms of the use of personnel and do multiple things as opposed to just, okay, here we are. Here's our 11 personnel package. And theirs was pretty basic in one sense, in that Tyler Boyd, who's obviously now a Titan, was almost always the slot receiver. So it's not as if they had three receivers who just moved all over the formation. So it'll be interesting. I mean, look, defenses evolve, offenses evolve. That's the fun of the offseason. I've gotten a chance to talk to a lot of coaches this offseason, and the conversations are unbelievable. These guys, they think about this stuff 24/7.
Yeah.
You know
Well,
that. You've been around them. You know how they think. It's nonstop.
they're all sickos, Greg. They're all
Yeah.
they're all
I'm
caught
I'm
up in
I'm
it
right in
all the
that
time.
category, Buck. That's the
No, I
problem.
know
I'm
it,
right in
brother.
that category.
I which is why I appreciate I always appreciate getting the opportunity to talk, to just look at it through the prism that people like yourself, coaches, scouts, personnel evaluators, because you are correct. They eat, sleep, breathe, and just live this stuff 24/7, 365. It is a nonstop thing. I know Brian Callahan mentioned he was getting a little itchy around the 4th of July to get back to
That's what
business.
happens. I
So
mean, hey Buck, just to think about this. I've already watched probably about 115 players who are going to be in next year's draft in great detail. That's what I do.
I'm going to enjoy a couple more boat weekends before I start to dive in that way, Greg, but I appreciate you for doing it. Well, when next we meet, Greg, we will let's just rip the Band-Aid off and let's do the Dallas Cowboys, because God knows you haven't talked enough Cowboys, I'm sure, in your lifetime.
You know what? Everybody likes to talk about the Cowboys.
Well, I'm telling you, for reasons that are beyond me, but they do have some interesting players, and this is a very critical year for them. So we'll start our NFC East preview when next we meet on Wednesday, and I appreciate your time as always, my friend.
Thanks, Buck. Appreciate it.